down, power lines are down.
Message of 290 characters follows.
Okay, guys, welcome into another episode of Grid Down Comms Up. Today, we are going to have a bit of a discussion on which radio service is right for you. This is a common question that I hear about people just trying to decide what radio should I get, which radio should I get. Well, that's oftentimes a more complicated question than face value would seem. So we're going to do a quick run through here of all of the different radio services that are available to you and what the ups and downs, ins and outs of those are. Now, if you're already an amateur radio operator, if you're already a radio person, this video is probably going to be kind of boring for you. This is intended for people that are kind of coming to this with what do I do, what do I buy? And we're going to look at the options. We're not going to go into a great deal of detail about setup and configuration or anything like that. That's for another video. This is just what tools are available out there that may fit your needs. So which radio service is right for you? First, I think we need to take a moment and talk about the application of communications. So communications facilitate logistics, information, coordination. They are a force multiplier for us because it allows us to get what we need, where we need in a quick time frame. This is part of the core of communications. Oftentimes, we get wrapped up in communications for the sake of communication. Facebook is a good example of this at times. People post what they had for lunch on Facebook. I don't care. Most people probably don't care, but that's communication for the sake of communication or communication for the sake of like me. In an emergency, in the times when we're looking at what do we do as an alternate form of communications, we're boiling communications down to the core of what is essential for us to share or communicate. Second part of communications is communications types. Largely, we have two-way communications. So two-way communications are conversation between me and you. It's a conversation that two or more people are involved in where that an exchange of information is going back and forth. What I'm doing right now is a broadcast type communications. It's me talking at you or to you, but you can't talk back. It's a one-way form of communication, generally used for distributing information or entertainment. Now, how we use communications on a daily basis. Well, most of us use communications to communicate with other people, to coordinate stuff for work, to check on family members and loved ones, to order supplies, goods, and materials. Have you placed your Amazon order today? Not that I'm encouraging everyone to use Amazon, but the truth is most of us do. So those are, some examples of communications on a daily basis. If we were doing this in a class, this would be where I'm picking on my students, asking them the examples of how we do communications on a daily basis. So just think about what you use your cell phone, what you use your internet, what you use your radios, what you use them for on a daily basis. Think about those applications and think about how you might have to boil those down and transfer them to a much simpler system in the event that $1 billion of infrastructure is not available to you. So that's the next step, is how do you migrate your current requirements to other systems? And this is at boiling it down and going, okay, these are the things that I have to have in communications. And then we have to look at what's actually capable and possible. This is usually a hard part for students. And then we figure out how we migrate that to another system. And this is really the basics of this sort of application of, okay, I need to come up with a radio, but why? What are you trying to migrate to it? Okay, let's take a look at the tools we have in the toolbox for using our communications. Now, we are not looking at the full expanse of tools that can be used. There are things I am leaving out of here intentionally, such as Starlink, such as Meshtastic, such as PLBs, personal locating beacons, and two-way satellite text devices, all this sort of stuff. as well as other cell phone based things. We're leaving all that out because this is a look at what radio do I get. We're not looking at the other stuff. So before the guys in the comments go, what about Meshtastic? No, that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about radios. And we're going to talk about the details and other things kind of related to that. So here we have the Citizens Band, the CBRS, 10-4, good buddy. If you were around in the 70s during the CB craze, you're familiar with CB. We're going to take a deep dive into where CB may still be applicable and why CB largely sucks. We're going to take a look at the two common license-free radio services, FRS and MURS, the multi-use radio service that most people don't really know about. We're going to take a look at the license where you pay $35. License covers you and your family of the general mobile radio service and what it's really intended for. We're also going to take a look at the amateur radio bands because that seems to be what most people in the survival and preparedness world want to gravitate towards first, and why this may or may not be the best solution for that, because we really have to understand the purpose of amateur radio. And that makes it not great for possibly some of the people in your group, because you have to look at this not just of what can I do to communicate, but what can the other person I need to communicate with do. And then last but not least, we are going to look at the business band. I do a lot of stuff with the permaculture and agriculture and homesteading communities. And most of those people own a farm, which is a business, which opens up the doors to some other stuff that a lot of people may or may not have access to because they aren't running a business. So, first one out of the gate, the Citizens Band Radio Service, aka CB. Time to get your Burt Reynolds hat on and do your Smokey the Bandit impression here. All right, guys. So the first benefit of CB is it's license free. You just go buy the radio and you use it. Now, capabilities of CB. This is where CB actually does have some benefits for us over some of the other license free radio services like FRS and MURS. CB can operate in 3 different modulation modes. AM, which is what most of us are traditionally used to hearing on the CB. Recently, the FCC allowed FM, which is frequency modulation. What we're used to hearing on other radios tends to be quieter, tends to have a much cleaner audio sound to it. And last but not least, something that those of us that do long range or HF communications are very familiar with, which is single sideband. Now, I'm not going to delve into it's outside the scope of this video, the details of those things, but it is worth noting that those may or may not be benefits to you. The common cheap radio that you're going to buy, the CB that I have, that's a very old Midland that only does AM, because that's what CBs did for years, and that's going to give you the widest access to users. FM, there are very few people now that have FM radios. That's kind of a new radio thing. So if you're trying to limit the people that you can communicate with intentionally, then FM may be of benefit. And then single sideband, because of how it works, tends to give us a bit better range because we're doing less with the power. And that's, again, outside the scope of this. But realize that if you pay the premium to get a single sideband capable CB, it is going to give you some additional range. How much range that is really depends on a number of things. So CBs have limited power output to 4 watts, I believe. When you're running single sideband, you're just making much more efficient use of that 4 watts. 4 watts is not a lot of power, but it is enough power. And you're not really going to find another non-licensed radio service that's going to have more power than that. This does give you a decent amount of range. Now, real world range is going to vary widely. CB in its inception is at the top of what we call the HF spectrum, right before we go into VHF low band. It is a very compared to what we think of with modern handheld radios, it's a very long wavelength. This causes it to do very well in rugged terrain. So if you live in the mountains like I do, you will typically see much better range out of CB than you will out of the other radio services that are not licensed we're going to talk about. It's sometimes drastically further ranges. But still, don't get all expecting that you're going to replace, communications across the county with CB. You're probably not. You're probably looking at maybe 10 miles or so as the crow flies. Now, remember, get a map, use Google Earth or whatever you like to use, and draw a circle with a 10-mile radius, and realize that that's actually pretty good considering there's no infrastructure involved. Now, the reality is you'll probably see a much shorter range, and that's going to be exacerbated by the fact that I have rarely seen a CB radio installation that has an antenna that is useful at all. 90+% of the CB radio installations that I see, in the rare occurrences I do see them anymore, the antenna is garbage. It is hot garbage most of the time. And that is why you hear in the overlanding community, hey, I can't hear the guy at the front of the convoy of 20 trucks when they're off-roading together somewhere. And you can see them. That's because their radio is awful, or their radio, but their antenna is awful. So I'll do another video on antenna installation at some point, but realize that to have an efficient antenna, typically we need a quarter of a wavelength antenna or longer, and that antenna needs to be mounted on a flat metal surface for a mobile application, so like on the roof of your car. Well, a CB antenna is 102 inches long to get a quarter wave antenna. That's, what is it? It's 96 inches is 8 feet. So, it's over 8 feet. It's 8 feet, 6 inches, 8.5 feet tall. So, used to see those in the 70s mounted on the bumper of cars, that kind of thing. Yeah, was that better than a fiberglass, wound antenna like you see on the side of a lot of trucks? Yeah, it was. Was it still a great antenna? No, it wasn't. So that's the problem with CB. The antennas are big. That's also the problem with like portable CB. A lot of us want a radio we can carry with us. Our application, our communication needs is it has to be man portable. Well, there are several companies that make portable CB radios that you can use as a handheld. The problem is the antenna is only slightly better than a test load where you're just turning all your power into heat. The antennas are worthless. Handheld CBs typically do not have very good antennas. In fact, they will perform worse than a lot of other radio services that are license free in a handheld format. But, it is something to consider if you're trying to communicate vehicle to vehicle, if you're trying to communicate from fixed station to fixed station. CB's got a decent little bit of range to it, especially in the mountains, compared to some of the other services that are free. So while I and a lot of us tend to poo-poo CB a little bit, it's because largely the user base on it is incorrigible at times. It's a decent radio service and something that you should at least be aware of. It might fit your unique role, especially if a lot of people in your area are using it. Still used a lot in construction and that kind of thing.